May 30 definition of terms in personal identification. Number 1. Alphonse Bertillon was a French criminologist and anthropologist who created the first system of physical measurements, photographs, and the record keeping that the police could use to uh, identify recidivist criminals. Next, ancient Babylon fingerprints were used in day tablets for business transactions 1000 to 2000 BC. Next is anthropometry, the first system of personal identification. Number 4 is next is Azizot, Hake, and then Karak Chandra Bose in 1897. Two of Indian fingerprints experts credited with preliminary development at the Henry system of fingerprint classification, named after their supervisor Edward Richard Henry. Number 5. Bertillon systems. Systems of identification which focuses of the meticulous measurements, recording of different parts and component of the human body. The next is Chiroscopy. It is the examination and thorough study to the palms of the human hand as point identifying persons. Next is scar, approximate center of the path. It is a place upon without the inner moods sufficient regard. Next is delta, point on a ridge of or nearest to the point of divergence of two taper lines and is located at or directly in front of the point of divergence. Next is Dr. Henry P. DeForest, the accomplished the first fingerprint that published in the United States and the first use of fingerprinting by a U.S. government agency. Next is Dr. Nehemiah Grew, 1884. He was the first published friction ridge skin observation. Next is edgescopy, the study of the morphological characteristics of friction ridges from shape or contour of the edge of friction ridge. Next is Edmond Locard, informally referred to as the Sherlock Holmes of France. He developed the science of poroscopy. Next is fingerprint. Is an impression of the friction ridge of all or any part of the fingerprints ridge are formed during the 3rd to 4th month of total development. Next is the Henry classification system, developed by Henry in the late 1800s. Next is mm, igno Ichthyophalangometric system. The original name of the system developed by Vucetich in 1891. Dactyloscopy, the new name of the system developed by Vucetich. Next is the Oloris system of classification developed by Oloris. Identity developed in the 1900 by G. Tyler Mayers. This American system of the fingerprint classification developed by Parke in 1903. The Conley system, the Flock Conley system developed in 1906 in New Jersey. An improved Conley system. Next is Collins system, classification system for single fingerprints. Fingerprints used in Scotland Yard in the early 1900s. Next is Jorgensen system, a classification system for single fingerprints used in the early 1900s. Next is Batley system, a classification system for single fingerprints used in 1930s. Next is Gilbert Thompson. He used his thumbprint on a document to prevent forgery, first known use of fingerprints in the US. Next is John Evangelis Porgenji, anatomy professor at the University of Breslau in 1823. He published his thesis discussing fingerprints patterns, but he made no mention of the value of fingerprints for personal identification. Next is Juan Vucetich. In 1892, two boys were brutally murdered in the village of Necochea near Buenos Aires, Argentina. Next is loop. One or more ridge enter upon either side curve, touch or pass an imaginary line between delta and curve. Pass out, trend in pass out upon the same side the ridge entered. Next is tree loop classification. A sufficient recurve delta ridge count across looping ridges. Next is Marcello Malpighi. In 1666, on anatomy professor of the University Bologna noted fingerprint ridges spiral loops in his treatise. Next is Mark Twain, author of the novel Vad Need Wilson, were one of the characters as a hobby of collecting fingerprints. Last is Paul Jean Collier of Val-de Grâce in Paris published his observations.